I will make it live.
I think recording is already started.
So shall I proceed or you will introduce me first?
Yes, yes, just wait on.
Okay, no problem. I'm waiting.
We can start now. Sandeep sir, I've already started
Yes,
recording it. We can start now.
okay. Very good afternoon to everyone, all the joinees. A very warm good afternoon. And this is our pleasure to host Dr. Tapash Rudra from Malaysia for today's session. Regarding the brief about our today's guest speaker, Dr. Tapash Rudra. He has done PhD and postdoctorate in biotechnology and is working with a leading Malaysian university in the capacity of associate professor. After completing his PhD in biotechnology in 2011 from University of Calcutta, Dr. Rudra continued his postdoctoral research uh, under the grant sponsored by National Tea Research Foundation, and it was continuing till 2014. He has been serving both as editor and reviewer of several globally reputed journals since last 15 years. During the academic career of Dr. Rudra, numerous scientific articles, research papers in very high quality, peer reviewed, both at international and national levels. His research interests are focusing on medical biotechnology, environmental biotechnology, biomedical sciences, biological sciences, and allied health services. Today, he is going to talk about the fundamentals of research methodology in relevance to proposal or thesis writing, a comprehensive guideline. Now it is over to Dr. Tapash Rudra. Again, a warm welcome from the fraternity of LBF campus. Uh, Now you can proceed.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind words. It's my privilege to work with you and give my whatever knowledge I have. I will love to share with you with the faculty members as well as my uh, dear students. So, as you have already mentioned, that the title itself is showing why I have chosen this one, because most of the students who are participating here will be doing, or rather they are doing their research methodology and in line with their proposal or thesis writing. So this particular topic, only because of that I chose to make them aware what are the things where they should focus on during the course of their studies until they submit their thesis, and of course before that they have to defend their proposal and how the entire things will be looking like. So after going through it, I hope most of the students will be benefited. So let me start with my slide. First of all, we must focus on this particular thing. We all say different words to summarize a thesis or a proposal. We say different kinds, I'm sorry. We say different kinds of terminologies even to illustrate the particular thing. We say sometimes thesis, that's why I meant here thesis. Sometimes we call it dissertation. So in a big picture, whatever it's a dissertation, whatever it's a proposal writing, or eventually to the thesis submission, what your thesis describes is the most important thing to look at. So your thesis, whenever you are talking about a proposal, even proposal is nothing but the summary of the entire, summary of the entire thesis whenever you are submitting later on. So your thesis describes your plan of work. First of all, you should intend what your intended study. You have to focus from the right from the beginning. Whenever you are talking about what your intention, the main thing you have to focus, what's your scope and research questions. I mean, why you are doing these particular things, what are the scope looming around this particular study, what you are doing. And of course, in line with that, you have to frame the research questions. Secondly, how you intend to study your topic. I mean, that's the most important part. Methodology. We have several methods, several methodology to take forward whenever you are talking about a particular proposal. Because in a proposal, what kind of methodology you are putting, that methodology should be subsequently followed until and otherwise you will submit your thesis later on. So this is a very important part to take care of. That methodology, whatever you are putting in the proposal, you have to be very precise. You have to be very aware that, okay, this methodology I'm putting, am I 100% right? This methodology will going to give me a proper result, or the data that I'm looking for during the thesis submission, or the entire course of work afterwards we're going to submit the thesis. So this is a very important part to choose which kind of methodology you will choose to construct your proposal and later on to submit your thesis. Next, why this topic needs to be studied. This is the more very important part. We can do any kind of studies, even we can blindly study for 10 years, 15 years down the line in vitro. But the thing is, until and otherwise, you have an impact of regarding your studies and how will benefit the existing fraternity, whatever you are studying in the any of a kind of area, like you are belonging basically from IT institute, somebody like me is coming from biotech, somebody is coming from even social sciences. So every one of those should think that, okay, this particular study I'm taking into consideration, after all, what kind of significance it will eventually lead to the existing fraternity or to the next level scholars. Because you have to remember all the time that you cannot do entire study as a whole. You have to stop somewhere else and somewhere down the line, and other levels, other scholars will take where you actually will give going to leave that particular study or particular study, and from there the other level scholars will take forward. So that is the most important part, the significance of the study, how your study, how your work going to benefit the existing fraternity and to the next level scholars. Next, when you will complete this work, that is a very important part. You cannot take too much of time for your masters, even for your PhD. That you have to prepare that, okay, within 2 or 3 years, we have to submit. We know that there are in universities, we have two different kinds of masters, even the PhDs. One of them is a coursework, another one is a purely research based. So anyways, I'm talking about basically on the research based. In research based, there is no time limit. However, you have to always remember that this is my time limit, and you have to be very specific right down from this proposal and until and otherwise you submit your thesis. So this is a very important part, and for that, although it is not mentioned here, you have to prepare a grant chart. We call it a grant chart, that from this particular part to this particular part, in terms of month, for example, you will be collecting the data. Then you will be assessing your data, that we call the interpretation of the data. And finally, you will do at the same time the statistical evaluation regarding this data which we have been collecting or rather collected. Then on the basis of that, you have to form your timeline or grant chart. You may vary from here to there, say 1 month or 2 months from here to there by those grant chart, but you cannot deviate too much. So that is a very important part, how you're framing your timeline and how you are framing your overall study. So my main point is you have to be very aware what is your exact timeline, and be sure that you have to do the entire things within this mentioned timeline. And of course, your supervisor and co-supervisors will help you on that way. But after all, you are the candidate, or whoever is doing the study, he or she will be the candidate. So in that case, it's very, very important to form the timeline or grant chart in order to process the proposal and later on, subsequently during the submission of the thesis. And occasionally what we do, generally we have to focus where you will conduct this study. Say we are now, I'm talking from the Malaysian perspective. If it is Malaysia also, you have to be very precise that which part of Malaysia you are talking about, whether it's a peninsular Malaysia or it's a other part of Malaysia. If it is an Indian subcontinent, where you are actually doing your study, which exact area which you are talking about, And if specifically, if you want to be more precise, then you have to go for other details, which will eventually enlighten the data which you have collected regarding your studies. So these are the most important part. Before I go to the next different parts of the slides, you have to be very sure that what you intend to do, how you intend to study, why this topic makes if what will be the significant outcome of this particular study, and then, sorry, accordingly you have to form your timeline, and finally why you are doing the study, and it should be very much specific. Okay, let's move on. Basically, whenever you are talking about a proposal or a thesis, these are the main things you have to always remember. What's the purpose? Whenever you are doing anything, say for example, we are doing any kind of stuff, not only a research, not only a business, whatever it is, we have to have a purpose. Without purpose, we generally don't do anything as a human being. And that's the most important part, which we rather we ourselves discriminate from the other animals, or generally we are always purpose driven. So the thing is, what's your purpose? So justify your plan, and at the same time, whether it's a contractual, or how much is the, I mean, how long will be the duration or the entire tenure of your research project, you should be very much aware. So your justification should be in line with that, your plan should be in line with that. Show how your project contributes to the existing research, that I've already mentioned, that your research, until and otherwise you have a proper outcome, you have a proper significance, that research won't do too much for the overall scientific community, or anything, any community as a whole. So you have to have a proper significance of your study. Demonstrate that you understand how to conduct discipline-specific research in an acceptable time frame. That I have also specified, that you have to be very sure that which kind of discipline you are talking about. Say, for example, you are doing some IT stuff, at the same time your problem statement, later I'm going into that, your problem statement is totally deviating from your work or from your proposal. So it should not be acceptable. So if you are forming a proposal, this thing you have to be very much sure about, that what's your purpose and how much it is discipline specific. And eventually, if it is discipline specific, then only you can expect that your significance will be very much a beneficiary to the other level scholars, or even to the existing scientific community. And more importantly, after doing all this purpose serving, you have to be very, I'm to say very communicable with your academic advisor and committee. Of course, academic advisor for even master students and for the PhD students primarily are the supervisors and co-supervisors. And if possible, there will be a committee in the university. They will constantly guide you alongside with your supervisor and co-supervisors. So you have to be always in touch with you. Generally, what we do, what we are facing, I have been facing, that whenever you are giving a task to the candidate, whether it's a master, if it's a PhD, the supervisors are actually running to a different orbit, and the candidates are running to a different orbit. It should not be like that. You should be always in touch with the supervisor, and you should give the proper results. You should always give the proper follow-up, or rather, he or she also asks you to submit you the proper follow-up in order to assess whether you are really doing the real stuff or not. So you have to be very precise with your academic advisor, and of course with your committee. Now, these are why I am telling you the word anxiety. Generally, we feel like this whenever I used to my PhD, or when I used to start my PhD, I faced a lot during that particular time also. What to do first, what to do second, what to do third, like that. So I made it like this. Whenever you are talking about proposal writing, of course, obviously, somebody else and even everyone is starting from zero. And of course, we didn't have that much idea before we came to the masters. Even everyone does have this particular type of things. So there are certain anxieties, but at the same time, we do have certain solutions to overcome this anxiety. So these are the general advice I'm giving you, or these are the general advice I do give to my students as well, that establish a writing schedule first. And there is no particular schedule that 24 hours you have to give 18 hours. No, it's not like that. That's for your choice. but make sure that you will give a particular writing schedule and begin by free writing. Generally, what our students or rather we I can tell you from my personal experience that whenever you have been given a task straight away, the students tend to write and don't even reading. They don't even read that relating to that subject. My point is, if you read few articles, not few, several articles, and related to your proposal that's being given to you by your supervisor or co-supervisor, so you have to have a proper idea about that. And reading is the perfect time to go about that idea, to develop that idea. And whenever you will be reading, say, 20 or 25 article on the field that you have been given to, or the topic that you have been given to, automatically at your back of the mind that idea will be start developing. And again, at the same time, you should develop the free writing. Of course, free writing doesn't mean that you will be writing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, not like that. But the thing is, free writing means whatever in line with your topic is coming to your mind, definitely you should write. And that makes the writing schedule. Whenever any particular concept is coming to your mind in relevance to your study, you should jot it down as a writing schedule. And you have to form a writing schedule for that. And keep a small notebook with you to write down. Now we have all the mobile devices. Even a mobile device is more sufficient than that. So keep a small notebook with you to write down relevant thoughts. As I mentioned, thoughts will keep coming at you, and at the same time will go out. So whenever the thoughts will come at you, you have to grab it and write down in your relevant device. It may be a mobile, it may be a writing pad, whatever it is. But make sure those points are really not going out. So say parts of your writing into a recording device. This is also, we have now everything available in terms of your mobile device. So you have to have a recording device as well. If possible, the thought should be stored in any means, whether it's a audio aids or visual aids, whatever. But make sure that you have to have those concepts for later use. Compose different parts in different computer files. That's the most important part. When example, I have given my students to form a proposal. Now later I will show you what are the main aspects of the proposal writing or thesis writing. But what generally people or students they flutter is this, that no, I have been given, so I should start writing introduction first. There is no hard and fast rule for that. If, say, for example, you are having a sufficient knowledge about your literature review, or you are confident about writing the literature review, start straight away writing the literature review. And before you start, you have to make sure that individual files you have created in your folder, where one file should be written as introduction, another file should be written as literature review, another file should be written as methodology. Whenever it's being like this, the different indexes, or we call it index cards, or in the folder we call it file, in that introduction part, no information should be it should be put in the form of literature review or any other sections. That introduction file will be continuously stored in the form of the data or in the form of information that's related to your introduction part. So whatever you are familiar with, whatever you are confident with, start that section first. Whether it's an introduction, whether it's a literature review, whether it's a methodology, whether it's any other things of the thesis or proposal, hardly matters. So start with more clear out section first. That's why I mentioned which part is more clear to you, apparently clear to you, or you are assuming that that particular part I'm relatively confident now to write. So make sure that you will start with that. So these are the things I'm telling you. If you follow this, your anxiety of proposal writing or thesis writing will be going out more often than not. Because the thing is, these are the major things we have been facing whenever we start writing, or whenever we start writing the proposal or dissertation or thesis, whatever it may be. Some other things are also there. These are some of the other things that you have to have a understanding that the proposal will be negotiated. It is not like that. Even Dr. Sandeep is around, that some other faculty members are around, that whenever even you submit any article also to a journal, there is every possibility that it will be rejected straight away, or it will be more often than not negotiated. That means that the reviewers will give you the relevant comments on the basis of that. you will do the corrections. So you should not be 100% sure whenever you are submitting, no, it's 100% accepted. No, it's not like that. That's why your mindset should be like this, very flexible, that whenever you are submitting a proposal, there is every chance of being negotiated, not to say rejected, but there is every chance of major revisions being given to you. And on the basis of that, you have to revise on that. So this is a very clear-cut point I'm telling you. And of course, you have to think the proposal as an introduction to your thesis. As I mentioned, proposal is just nothing but the summary of your thesis. So until and otherwise you are very much sure about your proposal writing, it will be very, very tough for you to make sure that the thesis will be altogether correct. The third one is remember that the proposal is not a binding contract. The thing is, we always think that okay, I'm writing the thesis. That means like a book form. I'm achieving this book. I'm achieving this degree. It's over. It's not like that. Even these days, you might know that the thesis and the dissertation are also published in the form of a book. So if your thesis or your even proposal is a nice one, then every chance that you are being highlighted to the global community that okay, this particular candidate, he or she has developed a good proposal, even a good thesis, and that particular can be a very good book also. So in that case, you have to be very sure that whatever you are constructing and give your as much as possible, I mean, effort as much as possible. So remember that your proposal is not meant to limit ideas, rather it will, you have to be very, very practical on it. So ideas are always there, but you cannot limit those. And you have to be always realistic how those ideas can eventually benefit the next level scholars. And all the time, this is a very important point, the fifth point I'm telling you, ask your colleagues, not even for the students, not colleagues, the fellow students or the seniors or even juniors. You will have to always share your ideas to form a writing group because you cannot expect that all the ideas will come at you only. Obviously, the other ideas might come to the your fellow colleagues or fellow students. So they will share with you. Probably he or she is doing the different kinds of proposal in the different aspects or different scenarios. So he or she might help you, and eventually both of you can be benefited if you're sharing the ideas and concepts in a regular fashion. And talk to your advisor, as I mentioned every time I mention that whatever you are doing, you have to be very regular with your communication with your advisor. Of course, it may be a supervisor or co-supervisor or whoever you are talking about the concern with about your thesis or the proposal. So moving on to it, these are the major parts whenever you're talking about a thesis or else the proposal. These are the main thing which we always think that these are the main areas we should focus before we go for the proposal writing or the thesis writing. That the title, as you can see, the abstract, everything is there, problem statement and other things. So what I'm doing, I'm going one by one, and for each of them, I will give you a specific example that how a proposal or thesis should look like whenever you are doing in a perfect manner or trying to do in a perfect manner. See the title here. Title, what should be the title is all about? I mean, whenever you are talking about a title, even for any kind of, not only thesis or not only proposal, even for a book, say whenever you are doing the title, whenever you are constructing a title, the most important part is the title should be eye-catching. And more importantly, how much readers or how frequently you are catching your readers towards your topic. That's the most important thing. Means the orientation of the readers towards your topic. Indicate the type of study you will conduct. Very important that what kind of study you are doing. The examples are like, although the examples are basically, I have mixed it up to make it for all. Say, if you see the examples of this, role of the hydrological cycle in the vegetation, sorry, vegetation response to climate change. There is a column, and then analysis using VAMP phase 2 model experiments. That means this is the type. This is the type of your study. And the first portion of your title already made that what you are trying to do. And the second portion is emphasizing what kind of study, what type of study you will be conducting. So these are the very, very valid points whenever you are talking about a particular work title, whenever you are talking about forming a work title. And second example is also like that. So the title is not a hard and fast rule, anything you can choose, but whenever you are choosing the title, you have to be very specific that after all the readers will be reading, not you will be reading your thesis, say for example, after 2 years or 3 years down the line, but constantly it is being readable, or it is being read by the others who will start their thesis or their proposal where when you left. So that's the most important thing. And then we come to the abstract. We all know that abstract generally these days 400 to 340 words. And of course, in the abstract, we need to summarize this also we know. But what I'm trying to say here that whatever type of abstract you will be doing, it should be always carrying the most part of the thesis as a whole. It should contain the introduction, statement of the problem and background of the research and other things. Now, one or two things which here not there, I'm trying to share with you that abstracts are basically of two types. You might know one of them is called monograph, and another is the structural abstract. Whenever you are talking about a structural abstract, you are talking about more towards an original article. Because in original article, you have even in the articles, I mean, sorry, in the journals also, these days we prefer the structural abstract because there are some structured means you have to be categorized, you have to have a category of 4 or 5 sections. Say, for example, introduction, we will have the next, what's your problem statement. Invariably, this should be in the different section, even within the abstract. That's why we call it structural abstract. But whenever you are talking about the monograph, generally it is coming for the review articles or review studies, where everything is, there is no clear-cut distinction, there is no clear-cut discrimination between the introduction, the problem statement. But if whenever you are reading, then definitely you will able to understand this is the introduction, this is the, so everything is jumbled up. But whenever you are talking about original article, or because it's the original article, so you have to follow this kind of article, this kind of abstract, that is structural abstract, which will make sure this is the introduction of this study. This will be the introduction of this study. Following on, these are the problem statement. This is the problem which the authors try to advocate. And then this is the methodology they have used. And finally, when we were trying to do the results and the finally conclusion. So everything is structured. That's why I call it structured abstract or structural abstract. But monograph is basically jumbled up or messed up. And generally we go for it for the review articles or review studies. These are some of the examples. As I mentioned that everything, I will try to make it with an example. You can see, although this is actually given from my field, that here one bird, but this study was on the habitat or the conservation principle of one bird. That is a plover. Plover is a kind of seabird. And here you can see clearly that uh, why I underlined this particular section. This report, I mean, this is an abstract, although this is the summary of the report. That's why it is abstract. This report identifies the black-billed plover habitat in Louisiana. That means whenever you are doing this kind of stuff, you have to be very sure what this particular report is talking about ultimately. That means this report will identify what is the actual habitat or what's the actual niche of that particular bird. So this is just an example that trying to make sure, trying to emphasize what's your actual target. What's your actual target, and make sure that that particular target is there in the abstract. Like this particular abstract was highlighting the habitat. So whatever they wrote before this line and after this line is all related to that. But this particular part, why I highlighted, this particular part is making sure that this report is nothing but the confirmation of that the habitat of this particular species or that particular bird. So whenever you are forming this kind of any kind of study, any kind of work or proposal, you have to make sure that this is your particular part. This is the kind of thing you are looking for, and this is the kind of thing then ultimately you will be reporting. Okay, moving forward, this is the introductory part. We go for the introduction or background. These are the things you have to always be sure. Establish the general territory or the real world research. Of course, you should not be incredible, rather you should be credible in your findings. So you have to be very realistic that your research will eventually, or your study will eventually be practically implemented. Describe the broad functions of your study, provide sufficient background for readers. So these are the main things, these points you should include in your introductory part. You can write several points in the introduction, several lines in the introduction, but these days, every supervisors and co-supervisors, even for the journals also, you can see that introductory part is getting shorter and shorter. So whatever you are pointing, that should be perfectly in line with your proposal and your study. Indicate the general scope of your project. General, because it is introduction, so you should not go for specific scope. So whenever you are trying to read the proper introduction, make sure that this is indicating or this is highlighting the general scope of your project. Provide an overview of the sections that will appear in your proposal. Of course, this is optional, but if possible, you just add it. And of course, as much you engage the readers, as much of chance of you being cited later on, whether it's a proposal, whether it's a thesis, even whether it's an article. So throughout the article or throughout the proposal, if the readers will see, okay, this is a very interesting fact they have reported, and more importantly, they have reported quite interestingly. That's the most important part. How interestingly, how you're representing the project, representing your work. The representation is the most important thing throughout your study. You might have a very good knowledge, you might have a very good concept, but regarding representation, if you fail, then everything will be going haywire. So that's the most important thing, how you represent your study. That is very important. This is also, I have given you some of the examples of introduction. Later on, I will share these slides with you. Then you will have an idea that how to write the introductory part of a proposal, because basically in your thesis, the introduction should be much more compared to the proposal. In proposal, you cannot go beyond a particular page limit. There are page limits, so you have to stick to those page limits. And then this is extremely vital. You have to identify your problem of statement or statement of the problem, whatever you are trying to say. Whenever, say in Malaysia or India, there are certain problems being existing that has been existing for a long or for decades or even centuries, but still there are several studies going on. So you have to address why you have chosen this problem, why you have chosen this study. So you have to highlight a specific problem, and even after choosing the problem, you have to have a proper justification that why you chose this problem as a main work of your study. So answer the question is, what's the gap that needs to be filled? There are several studies, but the studies are of course without not gapping. That's why I'm telling you, you have to find the gap, you have to find the loopholes. What's the problem that needs to be solved? There are problems, and you have to identify the problems. Then only you have come up with the solution. State the problem clearly in early of the paragraph. This is very important. Whenever you are talking about the problem should be stated very early in the paragraph, not at the last. The problem should be always stated very early in the paragraph. Limit the variables you are addressing in stating your problem of question. Variables means you should have independent. Some of the variables will have some dependent variables, but whatever variable you are taking for your study, you need to address it at the start along with your actual problem, and consider framing the problem as a question. Like here, I'm telling you that I have been facing this problem with my students also, that they are creating creating the problem of statement. But whenever they are trying to form the research questions, as I mentioned, questions, the problem of statement is not tallying with their research questions. It should not be like that. When you have created the problem, okay, this is my problem, I have depicted this. Then your research question should be also in line with that problem. It should not like that your problem of statement is saying something, but the research question is saying totally different things. It's not like that. So it should be very well equilibrated, and then only you have to have a proper proposal. Of course, the statement, the problem in line with your research questions. These are some of the examples of the problem statement in relevance to your research questions. Again, I have highlighted the important areas where you will be able to understand why and how the authors stated their problems, and eventually they will come up with the proper solution during the later half of their proposal and eventually towards the thesis. Another important part is the aims, rationale, and of course research questions in line with that. Whenever you are talking about the formation of the research questions, you generally have you have to explain the goals and research objectives. Again, whenever you are forming the research objectives or the aims, you have to form the general one first. This is my general objective of my research, or this will be my general objective of the research. And on the basis of that, if you have to specify, on the basis of the general objective, you have to specify what will be your specific objectives of the study. So show the original contribution of your study during this rationale or aims of research. You have to provide a mere detailed account of the points summarized in the introduction, because you have already done your introduction. So introduction should be always in line with this, all these things. Again, I'm telling you, everything should be synchronized, starting from the introduction till to the very end. Include a rationale for the studies, why you have chosen this study, uh, what will be your aim, what will be your objective. Everything should be in a nutshell in the form of rationale. Be clear about what you study will not address. Be clear about what your study will not address, means what will be the potential limitations of your study. That also you have to address, because as I mentioned, that every study cannot highlight every findings. There will be certain limitations. So you have to address all those limitations. Okay, because of the time form, because of the time constraint, because of the other issues, I could not able to do that. Like that, you have to mention. If possible, during the proposal also you have to mention, even in the thesis you have to mention. But even if you don't mention in the proposal also, make sure that you are mentioning in the thesis that because of this, I did not perform this particular things. It may be time, it may be other issues, it may be fundings, whatever it is. This section may also, as I mentioned, describe the research question and more importantly, hypothesis. I'm sorry, I forgot that one. Hypothesis is a very important part. Whenever you are doing the hypothesis, you have to have minimum of 2 hypotheses. One should state, okay, this particular part, this particular study or this particular work will do this. At the same time, you have to put another hypothesis that we call alternative hypothesis or H1 that will say just the opposite, this study will not. Then if you are targeting, if you are in line of your work, if you are in line of your research, the null hypothesis will be accepted, meaning your original hypothesis where you stated, no, I will achieve this, that is called null or H0. That will, you will be achieving that one at your end of the study or research. And the hypothesis which you are targeting will be eventually hypothesized or becoming true. Include a subsection defining important terms. This is not so mandatory, but if possible, you have to do that during your proposal. State a limitation, as I've already mentioned, provide a rationale, also I mentioned. So these are some of the examples where your research questions should be looking like in terms of your, your research purpose or aims or rationale should be looking like in relevance to your research questions. Okay. Now, this is a very, I must say, boring, at the same time, very tedious and rigorous work. Because in literature review, you can put anything, but of course, those should be again relevant. And literature review, whatever you are doing, whatever you are putting in this section, you should be very precise that it should not be beyond past 5 years. If it is a theory, it's all right. But if you are putting relevant references in line with your studies, you should put maximum 5 years down the line, not beyond it. Say, for example, I'm proposing my proposal or trying to write my proposal in 2021. I'm using the references of 2000. It's not correct. It maximum should use the references, back references until 2015 or 2016, not beyond it. And of course, those references should also target your reference study or your actual work where you are trying to put it to differentiate that, okay, my findings is like that, they have found it like this, my findings is like that. So this is the most important part, choosing a reference from the and include it in the literature review section. I have already highlighted 3 points you have to take care of. How other scholars have written about your topic, because why we do the literature survey, because to finite your study that how other level scholars or previous scholars have already structured their studies and how they have written their literature review in their respective proposals or in their respective thesis. The range of the theories, what they have used, and how they eventually analyzed using those theories or the data, even the data, how they eventually develop their data using the proper methodology, how other scholars connect their specific research topics to larger issues, questions, and even practices within the field. That's why I'm telling you, it is not about writing only. You have to constantly think that how eventually my study will going to help in future. It might be the existing one, or it might be the next level scholars. It even might be the humankind. If you are talking about the, say, medical professionals, you are talking about who are dealing with the community. So you have to go for community level. You have to even read the mindsets of the community. And eventually, whenever you are proposing the proposal, you have to be very sure that those things will be also included in your thesis or eventually the proposal. The best methodologies and research techniques for your particular topic. There are several methodologies, there are several methods which are going around, but you have to be very sure that which kind of methodology will give you maximum achievement of the data. There are several methodologies, as I keep telling you that, but the thing is you have to be very sure, you have to be very choosy that which technique or which research technique will give you maximum amount of output in terms of data, because data will give you the real things. Whatever you are writing in introduction, whatever you are writing in the literature review hardly matters. The thing is, whenever you are talking about the data will be only coming if you are forming the proper methodology, if you are choosing the proper methodology, then you will eventually have the proper outcome of your thesis. So you have to be very sure which kind of research techniques you are using for your particular topic. These are some of the other factorials which you also needs to highlight. You have to situate your current study with a wide disciplinary conservation. Several studies are going on, which some of them which are relevant to you, which are some of them are allied to you. So whenever you are talking about the situation or situating the fact, you have to have a broader outlook. So in order to have the proper outcome, eventually, whenever you are submitting the thesis, whenever you are trying to end your project or the study, you have to be illustrating your uniqueness or novelty. We say in a study or in a proposal, until and otherwise you have a novelty, you have a uniqueness, that particular study is not a study. So there should be some novelty. That novelty might be 5%, might be 6%, depends on your work, depends on your clarity of the work. So you have to be very sure that something should be novel in your study that never been done by before you. So you have to have a novelty or uniqueness. At the same time, importance of and need for your particular project, that you also have. You have to have a proper significance, as I've told you several times, that you have a proper significance, then only you can think, okay, my study where I'm living, definitely some of the outcomes will come from a study, and eventually it will lead to the more beneficial outcome when the next level scholars will take up where I'm living. So this justifies the methodological choices also. Whenever you are using the methodological choices, also you have to cite some of the literature reviews that this methodology also taken by this particular group of scholars or these scholars. So I'm using this because this is in line of my study. And then demonstrates the familiarity with the topic and appropriate approaches to studying it. Whenever you are talking about approaches, whenever you are talking about the methods, it should be always familiar. You cannot take suddenly a method which has been never used. Suddenly you are using to say your thinking it might be beneficial, but again you have to have a proper reference for that. Without any reference, you cannot put that particular thing vaguely or randomly. So whatever you are using, you have to make sure that that's been properly cited. You or else you are citing or you are referentiating in a proper way. So these are some of the rhetorical functions which are related to our literature review formation. Whenever we were doing the proposal, whenever you were doing the thesis, or eventually the whatever it may be, you have to be very sure about all these points. Um, So if you are able to construct the literature review in a particular way, that should be an effective literature review should contain, it should have a proper background of the study, it will flesh out or it will serve a proper background of your study, critically assess important research trends or research interest, that should identify potential gaps. As I mentioned, unless there is gap, you cannot expect the problems will be existing. If the gaps are filled up, how can you fix the problems? Of course, there are certain gaps. That's why you're still finding the problem. So it's your part to potentially identify those gaps or the potentially identify those problems in order to go ahead with your study, and then establish a need for current or future research projects. As I told you, that whenever you are leaving, somebody else will take from there. So you have to address until and otherwise you address, they will not be sure that from where they have to go up. As I mentioned in the diagram also, that everything is moving on in terms of research. It's not the other way around. So whenever you are talking about a research project or outcome of the research project, so this should be always moving forward, not the backward. And until then, otherwise, you have a proper data, you form a proper design of the project, you cannot expect this. These are some of the key points. You all know about literature review by now, but these are the key points you have to address. You are entering a scholarly conservation. Like you can see from the picture that why this particular mass they're listening to this particular gentleman, because there are several gentlemen, there are several people who can talk forever. But the thing is, people will understand or people to listen to some of them, not to all, because the thing is, whoever. That's why we also cite some of the articles, not all the articles, isn't it? So whenever you are trying to develop your literature review, you have to also very sure. You have to be very sure that okay, this one I'm citing because this I'm looking as the best reference for my work or for my study. So that's why I'm citing this. That's why I'm referencing this. Although there are similar works, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I'm choosing or I'm citing only number three. Why? Because this will give you the best possible reference for my study. So you have to be very sure which reference you should take in and which you should not take in. That's the most important part of the literature review or putting forward a proper literature review. These are some of the examples. I'm not going into the details of the examples of literature review. You will find plenty of literature review examples. Just I have jotted down one. This is another very important thing, the methodology. As I have mentioned that there are several methodologies available in different fields of research, in different fields, IT, biotech, social sciences, medical professionals, they have the individual methodologies and methods. But again, you have to have an overall methodological approach, and that should be always scientific in line with your study. You should indicate how the approach fits the overall research design. Whenever you are talking about the research, you have to have a proper research design. We sometimes call it a frameworking. We sometimes call it a conceptual framework. We sometimes call it a fundamental kind of frameworking. So whenever you are doing this, you have to be very sure that this fits the overall research design of your study. This should describe the specific methods of your data collection. Like for your study, you might use some of the methods which might your fellow students or fellow researcher will not use. So you have, that's why your methodology is somehow different from your fellow colleague or fellow researcher. And that's why the two studies, although they are associated, although they are looking a lot, looking like, but eventually there are certain variations that eventually make one study different from the other. That eventually will make the study know is this is a type of study, although they are related, but there are certain novelty that makes study one as study one and study two as study two. So this you have to be very sure whenever you are forming the methods, whenever you are putting the methods inside your methodology. Explain how you intend to analyze and interpret your results. Whenever you are talking about how you're analyzing the data, how you're interpreting the results of your data, that is very critical. And for that, you have to have a proper knowledge of statistics and of course, theoretical framework. How you are summarizing the data, how you are representing the data, that's the most important part. These days, people even myself also, whenever I'm reviewing any article, I generally don't bother to go to the literature review or to the introduction or whatever, even the methodology. I straight away go to the statistical section. How interestingly or how critically they have, or the authors have represented their data. And if you have an idea of statistics, then you will be able to know that okay, this study is looking really promising because they have studied, they have most importantly analyzed and theoretically interpreted the data in a proper way. And that's how the statistical results are shown. So you have to have very good idea about statistical analysis. And then following on, if your statistical analysis is good, you have every chance of having a good thesis altogether. So if necessary, provide the background, the rationale for unfamiliar methodology. As I mentioned that, okay, for the time being, probably you are using that for the first time, I'm sorry, for the first time, probably you're using some of the methods which have been never used before. But the thing is, if you are using this particular background methodology, you should give why this particular method you are using. Because whenever you are using the method for the first time, people will ask, or people during the Viva or anything else, definitely will ask, why you choose this particular method? What's the justification behind choosing this method? Then you have to have a proper justification. You have to have a proper knowledge about this. Okay, I have chosen this because of this, because my study design is looking like this. So I made it. You have to make sure that why you are choosing this. If it's an unfamiliar methodology, is being never used before in line with your study by the previous scholar. So if you are choosing this, you have to have a proper method, you have to have a proper justification and concept behind this. And again, whenever you are doing any type of things, you have to address your potential limitations. Any study or every study will come up with limitations, and that is a part and parcel of your any kind of research. So you have to address also for this. I didn't do that, and when even if you see the modern days article, that in the conclusion section, the authors tend to conclude that some of the other things should be done in line with that in the future days to come, in order to make sure that these studies will going on, these studies will go on. So these are the potential limitations you also should address during your methodology, even during the later parts also. These are some of the examples. I'm not going into the details. When I'll share the entire slide, you will be able to know that. And again, significance of this implication I have already mentioned. Still, whenever you are talking about significance or the theoretical contribution, even in the significance section, you have to write that whatever studies what you are doing, this kind of studies or this kind of works have been already done, but what you have done and your particular study, specifically your particular study, how will going to imply, how you will going to imply, or be it is being implied, will be going to imply to the future days, to the future level scholars, how eventually it will be contributing to the scientific fraternity as a whole. That's the most important part, and that is the significance of your study. This is a lighter aspect I've taken you. Although this is not critical for proposal, this is for basically for research. Whenever you are talking about to write the overview of the chapters, although during the proposal it is not always or rather mandatorily not asked, but during proposal, I'm sorry, this is during the thesis writing, you have to have all this section and you have to have an overview of each chapter, and that's why it is called the overview of the chapters. So at the you can go to the last slide in the step 4, whatever you have done. Suddenly one day your supervisor or co-supervisor, he or she is asking, so how's your thesis going? Suddenly you have mentioning, no, I have an outline. So don't do that. Then definitely you're in trouble in front of your supervisor or co-supervisor. So you have to have a proper thing. Otherwise, you have to only go for the outline. You cannot go only showing the outline. You have to have something out within the outline. So these are the things I'm telling you. These are the content you have to draw. You have to develop whenever you are developing the chapters. Even for any kind of other chapters, also these are the most relevant aspects of the relevant parts whenever you are talking about the overview. And these are some of the other things which proposals generally, whenever you are talking about proposals even they are themselves quite different. Some of the chapters, uh, the sentence length description is different. Some proposals include a sentence length description of each chapter, and that is chapter 2 reviews relevant literature, chapter 3 discusses the methodology like that, but not always. This is quite flexible. Other proposals include more in-depth reviews of the body chapters that might include major hypotheses, arguments, methods, etc. for each chapter, etc. That also depends on your supervisor, and that depends how your committee is actually allowing you to do so. Like I told you that you have to have a proper time frame or plan of work. You cannot constantly work, or you cannot research for lifelong. Say you are starting your research and your grandparents will achieving the results. Of course, you will not go by that. So you have to have a proper research, and that's why your time frame is very important. So that's why you have to always in touch with your consultant, maybe supervisor or co-supervisor, whoever may be aware that more important dates for submitting and defending your dissertations. It should be aware. If sometimes it may vary because of the universities or colleges, their bindings or their circumstances, but it should not vary too much. Do not be overly ambitious, as I mentioned, that your proposal might be negotiated, and you should be prepared about. You should be prepared about that. And remember that your proposal timeline should demonstrate your awareness of the various elements of the study. Maybe it may be travel, how frequently you are traveling to go to collect the data, how frequently you are assessing the data, how frequently you are interpreting the data. This should be always in your timeline or plan of work. What we call it a Gantt chart. From this month to this month, we have this. From this month to this month, we will have this. And again, from this month to this month, we'll have this. So everything should be structured. Everything should be framed in order to achieve the proper proposal or thesis. Going to the last part almost, bibliography and appendices. This is also critical, but not always for all the sections of the studies, but still, this is also critical. You should include a working bibliography of key texts that inform your study and methodology. Of course, you should, and your appendices may include experimental diagrams. Appendices should not be. Sometimes you should be asked. You should have been asked that you should separately give you in the different files. So that's why the relevance of this appendices or bibliography. Your appendices may include experimental diagrams, even sometimes the figures, permissions of the human subject testing, whatever it is. I don't know about your IT, but whenever we have been, rather, when I used to do my thesis, I should give this human subject testing. If you are using the human samples, you should have an ethical consent as well, and that's why you have to produce an ethical form that this is your form and this is your consent. So everything should be added in the form of appendages. Both bibliographies and required appendices tend to be discipline specific. As I mentioned, whatever studies you are doing, it should be discipline specific. Know what the requirements are. You have to be 100% sure that what kind of discipline specific research you are doing, and at the same time, what kind of requirements you are requiring for that particular study. Um, some of the These are some of the additional things whenever say you are proposing or defending your proposal or defending your thesis. Some of the nuts and bolts you can also think about. The length, it might vary, but generally for proposals we consider 20 pages, but it might be 21, not beyond it. but they cannot be much longer. Sometimes it might be 20 to 25, but not too much. Style considerations, tone and coherence, these are also very important. Voice, visual aids, later I'm coming into it. So whenever you are talking about even writing, the tone is very important when conveying your attitude in your writing. That means try to stick a consistent confidentiality, or rather try to strike a consistently confident tone. That means whatever you are writing, you are very much aware about that. You are aware means you are backing up with the references. That's the most important thing. Whenever you are confident, you should have everything referentiated, and that's the most important part. Whenever you are consistently confident, that means you are whatever you are writing, you have to have a backup in the form of reference for that. And then avoid an apologetic or arrogant tone. You should not be apologetic, at the same time you should not be arrogant. That means whatever you are telling, it should be under scrutiny, and if it is scrutinized, you are very much acceptable for that, or rather you are ready to accept that. So that's why I'm telling you, you avoid the apologetic notion, at the same time you should not be too much arrogant. So these are some of the additional things I must share with you whenever you are writing something, whenever you are forming something. uh, Coherence, these are some of the very important points to take into that. Move from old information to new information. That's why I've told you, don't go beyond less than 5 years regarding the reference formation, or rather, sorry, citation or reference use of the references. So make sure that old information or old details should be transformed, or should be taken in the form of new information. Put the most important information at the end of the sentence. That is called stress position. Whenever you are talking about the most important position, that means you are thinking for your study, this is the most important position to be accounted. So in that particular part, it is you should use that particular most important section or most important information which you are thinking at the end of the sentence, not right at the first or beginning. Keep the subject and verb together. Always you should use the verb and subject together, because these days, if you go for certain journals, they are very much aware about this and they are going for this. And honestly, if you don't do that, there is every possibility of rejection of those journals. One of them, I'm telling you, British Journal of Medicine, BMJ. They are very much rather what to say, very much strict on that. That whenever you are doing this kind of stuff, they will be not even notifying you, they will reject it. So start sentences. Another important thing is start sentences with short, easily understood phrases. You should not use all the time phrases, but start sentences with short, easily understood phrases. Even during the course of your writing, also sometimes you can use the phrases which might help you, which might beautify your writing in order to engage the readers more and more. Use stock transitional phrases wherever possible, and use, of course, pronouns and or recycling, whatever you are doing. These are the things, although these are not hard and fast, but I'm telling you, these are the things which might help you whenever you are trying to form your thesis or proposal, whatever. And now, these are some of the examples you can go with. How Lay et al. In 2000, he mentioned about when they were forming some of the water deposits, how they develop their coherence during the forming of their writing. And now, more nuts and bolts. Some of the others are left regarding voice. As I told you, during tone, I mentioned some of the things. Now, in voice, generally, whenever you are dealing with the scientific studies, we prefer the passive voices instead of the active voices. So, whenever you are proposing something or writing proposal, your sentence should be like this: these things will be done, or during this course of 3 months, these things will be collected, or this much of data will be collected. Because proposal means you are proposing something you not yet done, you will be doing. So passive voice will be frequently used instead of the active. So like I mentioned here, I will be doing this, or this will be done. You can understand now what is an active and now what is a passive. So whenever you are talking about proposing, whenever you are doing some proposal, you will be using the passive one, because you know whenever you're proposing, that means you will be actually doing that. So that's some of the tips you can follow. Reasons to use passive voice, why I'm using. Your field may prefer its use, especially in describing research design and experimental activities. As I mentioned, that you will be using this research design and experimental design, not yet done. You are proposing something. You will be starting your work after you propose. So you have to be using the passive ones. You need to preserve coherence from sentence to sentence. You cannot always go for the coherence. Sometimes you have to preserve, and again, during say 2-3 different sentences, after 2-3 different sentences, even again use that. This is another examples of the coherence. Using, you know all about the black holes in a space. So a black hole, like I mentioned here, black hole is created. You can clearly see it is a passive voice. A black hole is created by the collapse of a dead star into a point perhaps no larger than a marble. So that's how we generally goes. Even you can see, you can also write it in the form of the active voice, but you should not, because passive voice is always favored compared to the active. Because of such things, you'll be doing the things not yet done. And finally is the visual aids. If possible, you can use the visual aids, incorporate in the form of charts, graphs. Even in the graphs also, you can use several different types of graphs you can form from the Excel sheets, and diagrams, illustrations, whatever possible. And of course, this should be permissible by your supervisor and co-supervisor and the respective committee members. And of course, it should be practical. So here I'm ending you. Anybody, if you have any questions, you can ask without any hesitation. Hello? 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 Hello?
Hello.
If anybody having question, he or she can
Yes,
ask.
sir. From audience side, any question here, please type in the message box. Okay, I think there's no question at all, and it's a very comprehensive guideline.
Thank you, sir.
Sir has Dr. Tapash Rudra, thank you very much for joining. It's a very wonderful, very comprehensive. I think you have covered each and every dimension of the research academic writing, right? I believe that all the people who has attended from this Zoom meeting and those people who are looking this presentation from LBF website, so all have benefited a lot. On the behalf of LBF fraternity, I am very obliged to host you, and thank you very much for joining us for today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And
Have a wonderful. Yes, Jalji sir.
request all the attendees to please, I've shared the feedback link, so please provide your feedback there.
Yes, they can drop their feedback, and see you the next Sunday for the next webinar. Thank you very much, Dr. Tapash.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.